AM 1300 WMEL.
The views expressed on the following program are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and are not necessarily those of WMEL staff, management, or advertisers.
This is Joe Steckler, folks, your host for Helping Seniors, the radio arm of Helping Seniors of Brevard County Incorporated, and our job is to educate, inform, and connect seniors to resources. Not everybody agrees with that, but I agree with it. Our board of directors agrees with it, and to my knowledge, all my panelists agree with it, because it just keeps coming back to me that if people don't know what's available, how in the heck do they make themselves have access to it? You can't. You have to know what is happening in Brevard County if you want to be connected. And that's the purpose of our show. And that's the purpose of having the 26 sponsors we now have, folks. And it looks like we're talking to 10 more. Some of them are major sponsors. And one of them will be one of the biggest home health care companies that will rival Gentiva. And I'm meeting with those people next week. There's just so many good things happening that I was talking to my panelists, Dave Bill Johnson, at the radio station here about what we're going to talk about today, and we'll get into that in a minute. But let me first mention our sponsors, because these sponsors are all individual organizations that have senior needs first and foremost in their minds about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And when I read them, you'll see Gentiva Home Health Care, the Eye Institute. And I sat next to Mike Mendisi from the Eye Institute at a children's function last Sunday where some children made their first Holy Communion. And Michael was sitting next to me at a table at the dinner. And he asked me how things are going with Helping Seniors. They're a major sponsor. They believe in helping seniors. And I told him, and he was very enthused about all the stuff that's happening. So there we had the Eye Institute, Solid Bite Dental Implant, Bill Johnson, Elder Law Attorney, who's my panelist today. This radio station, Wusthof Hospital Systems, Levin Home Care. It's a smaller home care organization, but Jackie Esterling, who is a person that serves as their lead marketing person, she's all over this community, and probably many of you know her. Ren Care Medical Alert Program. It's a button-type system. You wear around your neck. It keeps you safe. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today, too, because that's one of the scams that's going on right now, and you need to know about it. The other one is Atlantic Shores Rehabilitation. It's a nursing home rehab center down in Palm Bay, and they're one of our major sponsors. I got to get the guy back on the show again because he needs to tell you about what's happening there. And the last thing I'll mention before we start our show is the social daycare. It's down at 5200 Babcock Street. I talked to the owner last week. They're just starting up, folks. It's a new type of adult day health care. I'm familiar with adult day health care. So I started 4 of them. So I know what I'm talking about, and I know that this guy, Bob Weber, is doing everything he can to stimulate, activate, and make happy the people that come to the social. It's an amazing, amazing place. So if you've got somebody that needs adult day health care, give them a call down at the social. I don't have the phone number. I do. I'll dig it out. I'll mention to you on the last half of the show. But I want to get into today's show because there's just so much about that Bill and I need to talk about. And first, welcome, Bill.
Good afternoon, Joe.
Yeah, it is afternoon.
Yeah.
Bill sends me a monthly bulletin, folks, that comes from the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. And it's a bulletin, and it's got a lot of really, really good information in it. And since the print's pretty fine, and I always blow it up so I can read it easier on my computer. But the substance of today's show comes from the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys and some stuff that's in the paper today which you all must be familiar with, which is called Medicaid care. And there's some things that Bill and I want to talk about on that today. But first, since this is Elder Law Month, Bill, why?
It's also Older Americans Month.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's both.
You're not an older American. I am, and I didn't know it.
I'm on my way.
Oh, I know that. But you got a way to go yet. I don't. I'm there. But, it's important. I keep harping, folks, and I keep telling you, we need to know what's happening. I wasn't even aware it's Older American Month. I knew it was Elder Law Month. But, Bill, why is it so important that not only the people, but the lawyers that purport to be elder law attorneys, why should they think more about the significance of an Elder Law Month? Why is that important?
Well, I think it's not purely coincidental that Elder Law Month is the same as Older Americans Month. But, there is a graying population in this country that is unprecedented as the baby boomers move through. And we're seeing surges in the people who are 80 years and above, as well as those, 70 above and 60 above. And so we're having a very large senior population move through the system. And, to have a month, the month of May, where we take note of that is also probably a pretty good thing to raise awareness of what it means to be a senior, the trials and tribulations of being elderly and what that population's needs are.
What do you do in your office, or do you do something different than what you do the other 11 months of the year? Do you do something different during the month of May?
Not really. They have press releases about this from the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, as well as the Academy of Florida Elder Law Attorneys. There are some functions that they organize on a state level, but as far as my office goes, no, I don't do anything. Just another month like the other 11. So,
but I had a sort of a devious reason for asking that question, Bill. I happen to know that your office makes a habit of presenting seminars about the types of things that we talk about today. And I guess it was 5-6 years ago that I went to a seminar you put on over at it was in a restaurant over on Wickham Road near Michi's restaurant. It was and you were outlining a new program you were starting about. It was a key word. It was a new program.
Oh, I think it was at Tuscany Grill. Was the restaurant.
Tuscany Grill.
We were talking about life care planning.
Right,
yes.
Right.
Trying to bring together the medical, legal, and financial aspects of planning for somebody's care. Well,
and the reason I was thinking of that was because one of the topics in the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys bulletin this month was people having a better understanding of their in their retirement years of their uses of Social Security, 401ks, Roth plans, anything that had to do with the manipulation and management of their money as they ended their working years, and they had to face the reality with increased life expectancy and increased medical costs and increased living costs and increase in everything, yet still the amount of money they had coming in from their Roth or investments or 401, and it was not changing. That was staying steady, but they still had all this work to do to live.
Yeah, I just saw another survey on that exact topic that most people did not think they had enough for retirement. It's the number one concern, outliving your money.
Well, you're aware of the fact that since you work with us over at Helping Seniors, you're aware that we have this advocacy group out, and we have several hundred surveys back, and today I had to build a stack of probably 75 or 85 surveys in a stack that I just picked up. They come in the mail. They come from all over the county, folks. But one of the biggest things that the handwritten comment in the verbiage is that the seniors are very concerned about the exact thing that we're talking about now, having enough money to live.
Correct. And that's the number one concern of retirees as well, is having enough money to live.
Folks, I'm not going to say this next statement to incite mayhem or cause a revolt in the United States, but Bill made a comment to me. He said, I wonder, Joe, what would happen in our country if the government announced the end of Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, there are people up in, Washington who want to do away with things like Social Security.
I know that.
And you would have devastation. I mean, every state would be impacted incredibly by the lack of a Social Security program.
Yeah. Bill, I do not think that the average listener of this radio show or watchers of television programs, national programs, or readers of national newspapers would believe the numbers that we encounter of people that are living on nothing but Social Security.
Well, just think back in the 80s, the mid-80s, I think the statistic was 3% of the American public had a pension. And they were in a worked for an employer that provided a pension.
Right.
And nowadays that's 3%. And the 401k that was created as a perk for executives has now become the number one way of saving for retirement. And I think the last statistic I saw was something like 75% of those 401ks were underfunded.
Yeah, and when you say underfunded, explain to our listeners what the significance of the underfunding. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's not enough money simply in that plan, but they haven't planned for enough money in the plan to live.
Yes, to retire. To people. Well, to retire properly. I mean, they are, they're going to run out of money. That's what's going to happen.
What will?
They're going to have to, when they retire, they're going to have to take a drastic reduction of lifestyle. Otherwise, they will completely run out of monies. That's what I mean by underfunded.
I've never really asked you something like this, but on my radio and TV shows recently, I've had several business people on talking about reverse mortgages. I am starting to see where we just might see a drastic increase in the use of reverse mortgages in our country, but that too could be limited by the amount of money available from the lending institutions to purchase the reverse mortgage.
True, and and all that does, from my perspective, is just kicks the can down the road. You'll have one generation that may be able to do that, but then you don't leave the house to the kids, and they don't get that inheritance, and then what are they going to do?
But let's talk about that a second. Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people I know say, I want to leave this to my children. My mother and dad, to my knowledge, loved us, cared for us, fed us, put clothes on our back. But they never said, Joe, I'm going to leave a house to you.
That's very interesting, because I was listening to a particular radio show, and one of the guests on the radio show said that she was appalled that what the attorney had done in planning her mother's estate. And her mother had a trust and this is a good point. And in the trust, she had left 1/3 to each of her 3 kids. And to 2 of the 3 kids, she had left the money outright to them. But to this particular child, because the child was a spendthrift, basically spent everything that ever came across her lap, she had the money doled out over time. And this lady's comment was, how could my mother do this? She got some really bad advice. You know, if I had that money, I could put it to good use right now because I could give it to my daughter to pay for her education. And the thoughts that immediately crossed my mind were the words entitlement and whatever happened to your duty to support your child.
Exactly right.
And it wasn't her money to decide what to do with. It was her mother's money to decide what to do with.
And I think that the lady was pretty smart to realize that she had one of her 3 children that couldn't that, you know, 2 of them turned the buffaloes into something else. The other one just let the buffalo run free.
And here she was on the radio confessing she would have given it all away. So her mother was really smart.
Yeah.
Because she provided. But I thought it was ironic that she, one, felt that she was entitled to get this from her mom outright, and 2, that she didn't have any personal responsibility to support her own kid. You know, that it was somehow her mother's responsibility to pay for her, you know, her grandchild's education.
You know, Bill, you're in the state, you do a lot of estate planning.
Right.
And you work with a lot of senior people. I send people to you, too. But, you know, as a parent, one of the hardest things, and if you all listening to me as I say these next few words, if you disagree with me, give me a call here, 631-1300, 631-1300. But how many of us agonize over how much we're going to leave to each of the children, knowing what we think some of them would do with the money if we left it to them without any kind of regulation as to how they could spend it?
Well,
it scares me, Bill.
Let's talk about that for a second. Maybe we'll get some phone calls out of this next comment. But this is what, you know, when we have people who work their whole lives to build a nest egg, maybe they have enough money where they can get a house, maybe they don't. Maybe they got some little, nest egg of monies that they want to leave to their kids. Do we as a society favor them being able to do that? Or say they get sick and go in a nursing home and all that money evaporates, paying the nursing home their monthly fees.
Right.
Versus, on the flip side of the coin, you know, and when I interview those people, those elderly people, when I interview them, they say, I do not want to pay all my money to the nursing home and go broke. I want to leave something to my kids.
Okay.
Something. To a T.
I agree with that.
Now, on the flip side, we talk about the billionaires who want to leave all their assets to their kids free of the estate tax. Okay? To a bunch of kids who never worked for any of this money one day, typically. You know, they're going to inherit billions. And now up in Capitol Hill, we're talking about doing away with the estate tax to make it easier for these billionaires to do that. But that comes at the expense of less money in the pot that could be used to help these other families leave a little something to their kids.
And what a lot of people don't realize, Bill, is that
as Governor Jesse Ventura once said, when you take from one pot, you got to put it in another pot. So if you're going to let the billionaires leave everything tax-free to their kids, you're going to have to cut somewhere else.
Exactly right.
Right.
Exactly right. But what I was going to say was that the government, in their planning, factored all this stuff in. And, correct use of estate taxes, correct use of all taxes, correct use of all federal and state dollars and private dollars. If we have a modern utopic world, it comes out pretty fair.
Well, where did estate taxes come from? Nobody really understands the reason you had estate taxes was to prevent the Rockefellers and the Carnegies from becoming modern era royalty. That was the purpose of the estate tax. We had our immigrants had left Europe and the feudal system over in Europe. That was still, you had lords and dukes and earls, and they were the vast property holders. And, they came here. And subsequently, they didn't want to see that here.
Okay. We're going to take a break, folks. And Bill will say something more about this after the break. But do stay with us. We got a whole show yet to do, so stay with us.
AM 1300 WMEL.
This is Joe Steckler, folks. We're back live with the second half of our Helping Seniors show today with Bill Johnson as our panelist. While I mention my sponsors for the second part of the show, I want you to grab a pencil and paper because I'm going to give you 3 quick phone numbers. And I do want you to copy them down because they're 3 darn good phone numbers for you to have. The sponsors for the second half of the show include Senior Scene Magazine, Hometown Newspaper, Spotlight Magazine, Seniors Helping Seniors, The Fountains of Melbourne, Beth Courtney from the Braswell team, their financial planners, Kenneth Chiropractic, Canadian Meds, and a lot of people are using Canadian Meds, folks. You might want to give Joe a call over there if you've got a question on your medication problems. Wiederman Malik Attorneys, Vitas Hospice, Peaceful Beach Mediation, and that's Brooke Goldfarb, and she's a Harvard Law graduate who does mediation between seniors to try to keep them out of a divorce court. And it's a whole new concept, folks. It's good. You might want to give Brooke a call. And today after the show, I'm meeting with the editor of Ebony's News Talk. It's a newspaper that we've been asked to participate in on a monthly basis. And, folks, I am so delighted to let you know that here we are now, a little bitty old program trying to help seniors, featured in Ebony News, 25,000 distribution, Senior Scene, 25,000 distribution, Hometown News, 250,000, Spotlight Magazine, 25,000. We're growing, folks. The need is increasing. Be involved. Here are those 3 phone numbers. And one of them has to do with the social. I mentioned that before. It's Adult Day Healthcare down in Palm Bay, folks. And if you live in Palm Bay or within 8 to 10 mile driving radius of the darn place, give them a call and go over and see if it's good for somebody you love. Their phone number is 373-7000. 373-7000. Another phone number which all of us need to know is the Florida Elder Helpline. And that phone number is this. It's an 800 number, folks. I'll give you the one I'd like to use best. 800-955-8770. 800-955-8770. Folks, and I'm going to tell you, if you use it, it is not for the faint-hearted. You have to be determined that you're going to get those people to answer the phone. I tried to call them last week, and at 33 minutes of waiting, I gave up, and I called somebody else in Tallahassee. But I know other numbers to call, and I know you don't. But if you're having a problem, here's another number. I'm going to give you 4 phone numbers. This is the number for Kay, our information specialist. If you try to get the elder care, you try to get Medicaid, you try to get the social, you can't get through to any of these people, call Kay at 321-473-7770. 473-7770. Now, the purpose for calling the Elder Helpline, in my case, was I wanted some more information on Medicaid, and Bill and I are going to talk about that in a few minutes. But here's a local number for an office over on Sarno Road. It's called My Access. It's right across from Commissioner Anderson's office, and there's a lady in there. Mary was one of the ladies I talked to. Their number is 373-0824. 373-0824. And they have an actual person that will sit down and talk to you about Medicaid, and you don't have to wait 33 minutes to see if your phone call is going to get through and picked up. Now, I'm not going to say where that phone call ends up, because every time I call these people, I get the same response. And that's something I'm trying to fix, but time will tell. Okay, back to what I cut Bill off to break. Bill, finish your diatribe.
Okay, yeah, I was on my rant.
I was
saying the estate tax, the purpose of it was to prevent American royalty. And it was created, in the era of the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, and that to prevent them from having dynasties where all the wealth in the United States was controlled by a very few people. And if you look around today, I think we're heading back that way to the era of the robber barons. You just have to look around the politics, both sides. And you can see the Republicans and the Democrats all lining up for their respective sides' billionaires. That's why we had an estate tax, was to prevent that from occurring generation after generation within the same family.
Yeah, and a lot of people have accused President Obama of spreading the wealth, of being a socialist and everything else. But, be that as it may, there were some pretty smart people that tried to put some decent plans in place. If we used them the right way, would end up benefiting most Americans.
Correct. And, we're all in the boat together. So I always view it as, if you don't have a large amount of the populace doesn't have much of the income of the United States, who's going to buy the products?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
If seniors are spending all their money, their Social Security, on medical care and housing, well, how are they ever going to buy, groceries or legal services or, we all know seniors who cut pills in half and don't go to the doctor because they can't afford to.
Yeah, on our survey that I told you, I handed Bill 75 or 85 of those before the show to take a glance at. One of the questions on there talks about a senior endowment. And some people say, Joe, and I want to thank you, those of you that know me, that have recognized my long-term involvement with seniors here in Brevard County. I do appreciate it when you thank me for some of the things I've been trying to work with other people to make happen. It is appreciated. But it also tells me that you're listening, and that's also extremely important. We can, if we don't try to do a better job working together, we're not going to solve any of these problems. But one of the things that I picked up from the National Association of Elder Law Attorney bulletin, there were two things. One of them was on scams, Bill, and you yourself have said it many, many times. Never give out your Social Security number. Why?
Right. Well, they can use that to access everything else. I mean, there's only a few things they need to really, if they get your address, Social Security number, date of birth, it's very easy for them to pose as you.
Yeah, and these guys operating this stuff on the internet are pretty darn smart.
Oh, yeah. There's not a day that goes by I don't get trolled, somebody trying to get me to do something.
And what Bill means when he says troll, folks, that's the stuff where you get all these things where it's saying, here's the guy in Nigeria or the guy in, it's just got this big wad of money he's got to spend it because...
Well, most people wouldn't think, but they go after law firms, too. I mean, I get hundreds of requests to represent people, and they have scams that they run specifically on lawyers. So could you imagine if you can fool the lawyers with this stuff, you certainly would be able to fool somebody who's, 80 years old with diminished capacity.
So the moral of the story there, in my opinion, and you correct me if my opinion, if you think it's wrong, my opinion is this. If you get into this stuff on the internet, just believe it sounds too good to be true.
Just delete.
Don't answer it. Delete it.
Delete it. Don't even open it up.
And it's the same thing goes when the IRS or your bank or a credit card company says something about you need to answer this. If delete it, because if they send you an official letter, the IRS never asks you for anything over the internet.
Correct.
It's always an IRS letter.
Through the mail.
And I'll tell you something, folks. If you get something from the IRS, and I've gotten several in the recent years, I answered them in writing, put the facts down in a manner they could understand it, and they understood it. That was the end of the problem. So those of you that get all this stuff in the mail from the IRS, if you've been a bad boy or a bad girl, you're going to get in trouble. But if you tried to be honest and you go back to the IRS and explain to them how you tried to be honest, in most cases, that solves the problem. Does it, Bill?
I don't know about that.
Well, but I mean, if you present it's just like in a court of law. If you make a good case, the judge listens or the jury listens.
Right.
If you're poorly prepared, they're not going to give you a time of day.
Correct.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on a NOLA thing was talking about nursing homes. Bill and I have we've done several shows on nursing homes over the years, and you've always made a point about going in, inspecting, and some of the other things. But a lot of federal law only has a requirement that an RN has to be on duty only 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that means that there could be 16 hours out of that day that there's no RN there.
I know under Florida statute they have to have a certain proportionate staffing requirements.
Right, but
and those, have are pretty liberal.
They are.
Yes.
So my point was that when you're going to think about placing somebody in a nursing home, visit the nursing home, see what kind of care they get at other than normal visiting hours, see what types of help they have on duty throughout the day, and what are a couple of other things that, Bill, you could tell them that they need to look at?
Well, visit at irregular times. If you come every day at 1, they're going to know you're coming at 1. So come at 1, come at 4, come at 8, come at 9 a.m., mix up the times that you come to see what actually is going on.
Yeah, and those of you that have a loved one in a nursing home, you know whether or not they're capable of eating their food themselves. So one thing you really should think about doing is checking in the middle or the end of mealtime to see if your loved one has, in fact, eaten their food or if they've had the assistance they need to eat the food. It's extremely important. You just can't put somebody in a nursing home or assisted living facility and wash your hands of it. You can't do that.
You can't do that. You have to visit. Otherwise, they will just be forgotten. And you have to visit, you have to ask questions, and you have to push to get good care.
Yeah. Why is it important, Bill, that people that suspect they have nursing home problems, or not important, but also what could an elder law attorney add to the power equation for the family in dealing with the nursing home?
Well, I think if you have problems with the nursing home, you definitely CC your attorney on those issues. Because, they're like any other healthcare provider looking out for liability, and they don't want that to occur. So they, will try to, it's the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So
yeah, but so many people are under the mistaken assumption that whatever it would cost to involve an attorney is not worth it.
Well,
that's wrong.
What would happen is initially what you would do is, if they had broken federal or state law, the attorney certainly could make them aware of that fact. If, you don't get any satisfaction there, there's always filing complaints with the Agency for Healthcare Administration. Who is the one who inspects nursing homes.
Okay. All right. Let's spend the rest of the time, Bill, talking about Medicaid. And I'm sure we could do a whole show on it. We got about 9 or 10 minutes, but I do want to spend this time because I think people need to be more aware of what's happening with the arguments in the paper, with what has happened in the legislature about the House closing down and walking home. There was an article in the paper a couple of weeks ago by Chris Merrill, who is a professor over at Eastern College, talking about Medicaid. There was an article by Krista Foley, who is the Speaker of the House, about Medicaid. And they're talking about the billions of dollars. But there's a lot of dollars in terms of millions, and it takes a lot of millions to get to $1 billion.
Correct.
And those dollars are not talked about, Bill.
Well, yes and no. Medicaid's a big line item in the state budget and federal budget, so you do hear people talk about those issues. Here in Florida, we do, besides, aiding people who cannot afford insurance for themselves, we have a lot of programs that benefit kids and elderly. So there are a lot of different populations that fall underneath the Medicaid umbrella.
Yeah. Well, our governor just returned from a visit with Health and Human Services Secretary Burwell, and Governor Scott wanted to get an extension of the exactly what did he want? You explain.
Okay. There is something called the low-income pool. This pool is to help hospitals pay for uninsured people who utilize, the emergency room, basically. The people who show up without insurance. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, the way it was envisioned is that you would have people who would get subsidized or could afford insurance policies. They would buy those. And then what you would do is you would expand Medicaid to cover the people who couldn't afford to buy their own policies. So you would expand it beyond where it currently covers. And then the low-income pool would go away because basically you would have very few people who didn't have insurance. They would either have their own insurance or they'd be covered by Medicaid if they couldn't afford it. When you don't expand Medicaid, which is what our state opted to do, there are people who fall between the cracks. And, the low-income pool is going away, and now the hospitals are screaming that they may have to close their doors because they will not have that made-up revenue. They will have a population of people who they have to treat, and they cannot get paid for that. Whereas if we had expanded Medicaid, they could have gotten paid for that. So, that is what's happening at this particular moment.
Then we get into the business, and I asked Bill.
And the Senate, the Florida Senate wanted to expand Medicaid. They were going to call it something else so everybody wouldn't get hung up on the term Obamacare. They were going to say Florida's right to work insurance or something. I can't remember what it's called, but it's something like that. And then the House was vehemently opposed. As most of you know or might know, the governor's flip-flopped on this. One time he wanted to expand it, then he didn't, and then he didn't, then he did, then he didn't.
Yep.
So
when we get it down to a nutshell, Bill, we've got people that, like me, retired military. I'm well over 65, so I have Social Security, I have Medicare, and I have TRICARE. I'm pretty good shape.
Right.
But we have other people that have a lot of money, and they bought their own insurance, and they're in pretty good shape. Then we have the people who are so poor that they couldn't buy their way out of a wet paper bag, and they got coverage.
Right.
But we got that group of people.
Almost what you would call the working poor.
The working poor.
Yeah.
And some of those working poor, even if they were handed the money, would not spend it on insurance.
Well, or they couldn't. We got a whole group of department stores where, people are working and they either are working, they don't get the hours they need to generate the income to buy the insurance, or the insurance that's offered to them they can't afford, just by their hourly wage.
Yeah. But the other part of that equation we got in there, we got like the silver, the gold, and we got three different levels of insurance. One level, if a person that's in this roughly 800,000 to 1 million people in the state of Florida, folks, you got people fall in that category. If they get too cheap a policy, that one that they can afford, it's not going to cover the expenses they need to have covered, Bill.
Yeah, there are going to be out-of-pocket expenses. The bronze level obviously has more out-of-pocket before coverage begins than the silver does, then does the gold.
Okay. But then we're almost out of time. But I want to make one more point, folks. For those of you that just read the newspaper, you don't get the stuff that Bill and I get. And it talks about we have these watchdog organizations that watch what the Senate and the House is doing. And it's like we currently have 55,000 people on a Medicaid waiting list, and the governor has put enough money, new money, in the budget to remove only 400 people off of that waiting list of 55,000. And this is the untold story, Bill.
And you're talking about the long-term care part.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the untold story.
For seniors, yes.
Yeah. And this is the one that gets glossed over in the newspaper. We don't talk about it.
Explain to them. We have 50,000 people who need care.
Right.
That are sitting on a waiting list waiting for that care.
Yeah, and now we have different schemes to manipulate the system to move people from Medicaid to nursing homes because the nursing home gets so expensive, then they get them out of the nursing home, put them back on Medicaid, and that's if you got the money or can find the money or the help to make this happen. But you still have 50,000, 55,000 people sitting there waiting for something to happen so they can see the light of day. And there's nothing there for them, Bill.
Correct.
This is
and the same's true for developmentally disabled too, persons with disabilities.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the waiting list there is huge.
Right.
As well.
And this is one of the reasons, folks, why we started helping seniors, so we could get a force of private citizens involved, and Bill's on our board to help people understand what these problems really are. And to do this, we started an advocacy group. The advocacy group is now having its 6th meeting. We are developing a way to help people get information. And with that, I'm out of time. And I want to thank Bill for being here today. And we've short-circuited part of this thing, but we'll talk about it another time. And I assure you we'll do everything we can to get you information. But if you have a question, call Kay at 473-7770. And thank you for listening. And please go online and take our survey. We need your help. Bye-bye.